Hey Wizards, V.E. Griffith here with a quick introduction to this special episode. In this show, we're going to give you a peek inside a coaching session with guest Elizabeth Wood, who this year is attempting her very first Nanowrimo with her very first long form work. Over the course of Nano, we're going to check in with her and coach her through the challenge using the 3-story method and see how she feels about her story as it comes together. You'll get a ringside seat as these bonus episodes come out. We want to do them weekly, and you'll get them on the podcast and YouTube feed in addition to our regularly scheduled episodes. For a few of you, this one is a repost. That's because in the first edition, I totally messed up the audio starting at about the 13-minute mark. I threw away the old work and completely redid the episode from the original recordings, and things should be fixed now. I apologize for my error. I promise it will not happen again. It's too much work to do it twice every time. As always, you can find show notes, links, transcripts, and rubrics at revisionwizards.com. You can support us on Patreon for as little as $1 per regular episode at patreon.com/revisionwizards. And we always love to hear from you with questions, comments, and feedback. And with that, here we go.
Welcome to the Revision Wizards podcast. I'm Miss Catherine M.H, and with me over there is V.E. Griffith. And today we have am I calling you Elizabeth? Did you want to be called? What would you like to be called? Who are you? Welcome.
Liz.
Join us.
Hi. Hello.
Tell us your name and your pronouns.
I'm Liz, she, her.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are doing a coaching session with you today. So I am super excited. So with my clients, I either know what I'm getting involved in before I have a coaching session, or they just come to me and I'm like, cool, throw it all at me and I will help you out. So which kind of version are you today? Do you have some idea of where you would like things to go, or do you want me to just start spitballing questions at you?
Well, the big thing that I'm looking for is possibly some help with world building. I heard that you're kind of like the queen of world building, so I wanted to pick your brain a little bit and see what you had going on. I'm really good at taking kind of templates, worlds that are already created, and then running with that, creating my own stories on them. Right now, I'm writing for the November challenge, and I've got a story that I've cooked up years ago that I'm actually trying to flesh out and write, but I want to stray away from what it was based on and actually create my own world around it. So I'm hoping that you can kind of help me there, possibly.
Sure. Do we have a genre idea? So when I say that, I don't mean you have to like really nitty gritty. Are we talking fantasy as in like we've got magic, I've got like dragons, I've got fairies, sci-fi? Where are you envisioning your world like?
So the world that I'm working on, it's a fantasy world, mostly geared toward like necromancy, undead. We got kind of a positive light thing drifting off into darkness, and then we're trying to bring back the life into the world.
That's awesome. Okay. Loving it. Just writing notes, sorry. Okay. So
tell us briefly about your protagonist.
So my protagonist, she's sort of a I'm broken right now. Hold on.
No worries.
So my protagonist she's a light priestess, kind of raised to, I really don't know how to explain this. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. So she's a light priestess.
It's okay.
What about age? What are we looking at age-wise?
She's closer to about 23.
Okay. If you were to
She's closer to about 23.
Describe her as if you're describing her to someone who is blind. So how would you, is she tall? Is she thin? Is she like skeleton? Would you consider her pretty? What description would you give to her to describe it to somebody?
So with her, I'd describe her as being blonde. She's about probably 5'1", 5'2", kind of small, bit meek, but she's really into learning. She absolutely loves hitting the books, doing magic. She is really curious about the world and what it can possibly do. She's got a sense that she's being sheltered and she wants to break out of that.
Okay, and what's your antagonist or force of antagonism here?
I've actually got a couple, and I think that I'm struggling right there. Um, Death really is a big one. There is somebody who is very close to dying. They have a disease that's causing them to ultimately meet their end. And she's trying to keep that from happening. And she ends up approaching somebody who his entire career has been spent managing death and how to avoid it and how to bring it and control it.
Okay, so is death an actual character, a physical character, or is it just like an element almost?
It's an element and sort of an idea, I think.
Okay. All right. So if you were to step into this world, so your main character walks outside of their house, what would we be seeing?
Mostly, kind of everyday, like the Earth, but slightly more, slightly brighter. You can kind of feel the aura of magic around you. It breathes in and out of the trees and the ground and everything in the air.
Okay. And now this is how it always is, or is this being dimmed because of the death that is happening around?
This is how it always is for the most part.
Okay.
Death really, there, story short, there was an invasion that has long since been over. It's about 20 years since that happened. And there were some casualties that continued to survive after the war was over. They're basically called the Immortals. So they're dead, but they're basically undead, walking around, living lives as normal. And right now, what's happening is they are starting to disappear one by one. They're either getting sick or they are struggling to see what the point is. So, I forgot actually where I was going with that. I'm sorry.
No, that's cool. I'm getting actually quite a bit. So okay.
What level of technology are we dealing with? Are we doing Lord of the Rings kind of horses and pull carts, or are we doing something more modern than that? Are we
Somewhere in between.
okay?
I would say if it's not a steampunk world, but it would be kind of on that level where you have the vintage meeting with the modern.
Okay, that sounds like it's right up Catherine's alley.
I'm trying to like think of which ones that would be. I'm wondering if it's more like Regency or if you would trying to think. Okay, so scratch that part. What do what kind of culture are we looking at? If you were to base it off of one of the ones that we have here in, our world, what culture would you say it is similar to?
That's an excellent question. It's kind of its own. Um,
Okay. So to expand more on that, like what kind of clothing would people be wearing? What are the colors that would represent these people? So like
I hadn't
example,
really thought
we
too much
wear
about that.
okay.
Sorry.
What would you
I
make
hadn't
them
really
to
thought
be
too
in? No,
much
it's
about it.
fine. Yeah. So now we can brainstorm some of it. What would you like your characters to be wearing? What do you picture her dressed in when you picture her?
I imagine them being dressed actually pretty thickly. I hadn't really imagined that it would be cold, but they'd be kind of bundled up, possibly not necessarily robes. I guess sort of like a Greco-Roman style, um, mixed with like medieval.
It's like even strangers that I've seen stuff like that before. There
Hmm.
is a group that I go to this Viking um, establishment, and part of them dress in a mixture of Viking clothes on top of like their Roman garb. It's super strange, but
Yeah.
it works really well. Okay. So, what colors would you imagine seeing your everyday person in? So, these aren't like the priests or anything like this. This is what,
Hmm.
if you woke up in this world and you walked outside, what are you wearing? What colors are normal to be seen?
Kind of brown, red, purpley colors. Um, Things that are more earthly, muted. Um, Not a whole lot of bright colors, really, unless you get into like the mages where they're probably wearing a lot more color.
Do the colors that people wear have any cultural significance?
Not really, no.
Okay.
So, let's look at your social world. So, do you have a system set up for if you are female, this is what happens. If you are male, this is what happens.
No, it's mostly equality. I mean, there are some gender roles involved in that. Um, Again, because some of the technology is limited. Um, but equality is a big thing in this time period. Anybody can do anything they want, regardless of what gender they are, how old they are. Age is something that's, especially with the mages and um, the magic that is available, age is not a concern. Um, they've been able to extend their lifespan quite a bit. So they can do pretty much whatever they want at any age.
Okay. So then that brings me to, are you their social and like economic statuses? So do you have, there's
Yes.
poor people. Okay. So describe a little bit of that to me.
Um, well, it's you definitely have, your beggars, you have your you have there's pirates, there's um warrior classes that kind of walk around and make themselves known, kind of get involved in the day-to-day every once in a while, make a fuss. You have all kinds of stuff. Um, I guess it's really hard
Do
for me
you
to
have
explain.
a government system? Like, or
Slightly,
is there
I
a
don't
king?
have it really fleshed out. I don't really have it fleshed out. There is sort of a mage government um, that they handle quite a bit of magic and law are kind of bound together because magic is just in the air constantly. Um, they live it, breathe it. Everybody does magic, um, so they have to govern with it. If that makes any sense.
Nice. That brings me to the next important question. Magic. Start describing your magic. It doesn't matter if you word vomit at me, I will keep up with you. Just start describing any of the points, anything that pops into your head at all. Go for it.
So magic is very strongly based in the elements, not only of the planet that they're on, but also of the universe itself. So you have light, you have shadow magic, you have the well, not the void, but you have a void entirely where there is no magic. You have uh, nature magic, which encompasses, earth, wind, fire, air, water. And it's kind of like um, really on the side its own thing. Um, you also have blood magic, which is considered to be in opposition to nature magic. Um, I haven't really dove too deeply into those details, but it is kind of a big part of my story, so I really do need to. Um, you have all of these different forces working together, and part of the part of the thing that comes to a head in the story is that they have researched all of the positive sides of magic. Um, and kind of gotten to the point where they have maxed out on what they can do with it. So they actually need to start using alternative forms of magic or darker magic to kind of beef up their positive sides. And there is a lot of theorists trying to figure out how to do that.
That is
Okay, that
awesome.
brings me to two questions to think about. First of all, if you have a light side and a dark side to your magic, what's the penalty for using the dark side? What's the downside there?
So there's a few there's not a whole lot as far as the government's concerned. There really isn't a whole lot of um, penalties if it's really severe and causes a problem as a whole. They can put you on trial, and depending on how many, if there were lives lost, or if you destroyed half of the planet, well, they might decide that you shouldn't be there anymore. But most of it is, I guess, it's sort of a karmatic system. Does that make any sense? You know, if you if you continue to use this negative magic, eventually um, uh, it's going to kind of eat you alive, I guess, is the best way that I can describe that.
Okay, so there is some sort of an existential or sort of bodily penalty if you keep it up.
Yeah, bodily, spiritually. Um,
Okay.
it's kind of an ebb and flow, yin and yang thing. If you're using dark magic, um, eventually all the light's gonna leave you. You'll lose your
Okay.
mind. You'll lose your life. You'll lose your soul.
Okay. What about a limiting factor in the magic? In most magical systems, there is something that limits a mage to how much he can work in a day or in a time period. In video game terms, it would be you run out of mana.
Right.
Um, in in some systems, it's just that it's physically taxing and eventually you wear out
Right.
physically and you got to sleep or you've got to rest. Or
Right.
in Dungeons and Dragons, you memorize your spells, you have a maximum capacity, and when you use the spell, it goes out of your memory and you have to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
What is your limiting factor?
Really, time and energy. Um,
Okay, so physical limitation.
yeah, physical limitations.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. So you've talked about magic, you've talked about um, some other things. You've mentioned a few times spiritualism, but now I'm wondering, do you have a religious system in your book, or is it like a spiritual system? What besides magic moves people?
Well, they're not entirely certain really what happens with the soul. They do know that they have one. Um, they don't believe they're definitely polytheistic. Um, and there doesn't seem to be any one answer one way. So there are some that believe in the afterlife. There are some that believe soul is a bunch of phooey because, they do see magic, but they don't believe in an internal soul per se. I hadn't really thought about that too much. They do believe in the existence of a soul, but past that point, they're not very religious. Most of them, they worship the light.
Cool. So that leads me into the segue then. I was going to say, because your main character is a light priestess. So what does that mean? What does it mean for your character? What does it mean to the culture that is around her?
Well, the big thing is they believe that the light is healing. She's serving a particular set of gods. Um, More for not necessarily for the afterlife, but for now and the present. Um, Kind of the common greater good deal. Um, hadn't really fleshed that out very much. Um,
So that'll bring me to my other question. Of course. um, necromancing. You've mentioned it now. What does this
yep.
have to do with your magic system, and where does it come into play in your culture and society? So you have some people who believe in a soul, some people who don't. You have many that will worship the light. You have people who think that that is the way to go. Negative magic can impact you and it can kind of consume you. So where does necromancy fall into this?
Necromancy, I guess that kind of falls mostly into kind of the power dynamic. Those who crave more power um, start doing necromancy is kind of between what we would call shadow and blood magic, and it has a habit of kind of driving you insane. Um, in order to create the undead, you have to rip away the soul, and then you animate them with blood magic. Um,
You're doing good. I'm getting a lot, so you're good.
yeah, so the outline for this story I kind of came together in about 4 days. So it was more of a hint, and I haven't quite fleshed it out. Some of the magic systems I had focused on a little more to kind of get the story to work, but I hadn't fleshed it out very much. As far as necromancy goes, um, it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay. So you've mentioned that you have a bit of a plot. Do you want to tell me a little bit about your story? If you were to word vomit at me, you don't have to tell me your plot if you don't want
hmm
to. Um, the big one that I like to ask people is, what do you think is the climax of your book? If this was the movie, it's like the holy shit, I've waited this entire moment for this. What do you think that is of your story?
Well, so the story basically begins with this priestess. She's going about her day, just kind of chilling when one of the immortals walks in. He is diseased. They can't seem to necessarily figure out what's going on. Eventually, they realize he's actually dying. They have not come across this before, so they don't necessarily know how to heal him. Um, so we have our light priestess who is extremely intrigued. She likes this guy. Um, doesn't really know why, but
Does
she
she
does like
like
him.
him?
there's something about him that intrigues her. She respects. He, he's an immortal. He's fought in wars. He's basically a warrior. So yeah, she kind of likes him, but not like that. At least not yet. I think she's kind of baffled because she's been able to heal anybody that comes in, and now she's presented with an immortal. Light isn't going to work in healing him. Nature magic isn't going to work in healing him, and she does not have experience in shadow magic. Knowledge in blood magic has been greatly destroyed because of a war about 20 years ago that very nearly destroyed the world. So she goes looking for answers. Now, this particular immortal doesn't really want to live. He's kind of done. He's like, please, just let me die. I'm okay. Just let me die. I'm done. She kind of refuses to accept this answer. I think she really, really, really just wants to fix it. So she does some research. She goes to a library. She meets a character. He's a librarian. And he spent... it's a while before she actually figured this out, but he, for about 300 years, has been practicing many, many schools of magic. He made it his life's pursuit to gain as much knowledge as he possibly could, and kind of became like the theoretical physicist of the day. He was like the kind of like the Stephen Hawking and Einstein all rolled into one as far as magic goes, but he was also kind of crazy, so he was kind of delegitimized, I guess. He went off the deep end, started practicing necromancy, and was eventually arrested for it. He was brought up on trial because he did actually sacrifice quite a few people in the pursuit of learning this magic. And he was sentenced to execution. So very shortly before his execution, he was approached. They said, hey, so we've got this thing happening. We kind of need your help. We know that you have a lot of experience with the magic that's causing it. We need you to help stop this invasion. So we'll give you a pardon and a new identity if you help us stop the invasion, or you can just die. So in the interest of self-preservation, he decides, hey, so yeah, I'm going to take that pardon and become a librarian. I really do need a timeout. I've spent the last, 250, 300 years causing a lot of chaos. I probably should just retire and have some peace and quiet for a little while. So he becomes basically a hero. He is assigned a new identity as a librarian and is basically banned from doing magic. Well, this brings my priestess into the picture. She goes to the library to try to do some research on this magic that can help bring this immortal back to life, basically, or heal this immortal from his disease. So there've actually been a couple of different which ways that this can happen, and that's another thing that I struggle with right now is like which one should I go with? But she ends up finding out what his identity is, who he is, and she convinces him to train her in the magic. He reluctantly agrees to do so. And then after he agrees, he's basically said, this man doesn't have enough time, so I'll perform the ritual. I will train you, however, to do this magic in the future, because we are going to start having more immortals coming in. You're going to need to know what to do. So he starts training her in the magic. That's at least the end of, or closer to the end of this book. He does end up healing this warrior. She starts realizing that she really does like this guy. So they end up going out on a date afterward. And that's kind of where that particular story ends, but it does continue way farther. Eventually, this librarian necromancer starts taking over the world again because he warns her, hey, if you get me started, I'm not going to stop. I love magic. This is what I need to do. I'm not a librarian. That's it. Once you get me started, I'm not going to stop. And he starts taking over the world. She eventually loses her mind. She becomes a shadow priestess.
That's not in this book, though, right?
No.
Okay. All right. So then for this book, I have a few questions.
Yes.
How does she know that she needs to start researching blood magic based on this immortal coming in?
She doesn't. She doesn't actually find out about it until she meets the librarian, because she's realized that she's at the point where the magic that she knows isn't going to work. So she ends up going to the library trying to find the answers. But she's encountered this librarian who knows pretty much everything there is to know about magic, and he's like dropping little hints on her as she's there. So she's actually kind of going back and forth between the immortal and the librarian, trying to convince the immortal to actually live. She's like, hey, you have gone through all of this. Now it's time for you to actually live your life because it's been stripped from you. And then she ends up going back to Dragon. She's like, I don't understand, but you keep telling me these things. What is it about you? She does a whole bunch of research into him, basically, and then confronts him with it. So she ends up finding out through the librarian that blood magic is the way that she needs to go. And the only way that she knows that she's going to be able to do that is through him.
Gotcha. So another thing, is it part of her character where it's almost a pride issue that she won't let this guy die? Like, he's like,
I think,
please just let me die. I don't want to deal with this. And she's like, no, I'm gonna like kind of go against all of your wishes for almost
yeah,
selfish reasons.
yeah. And it really wasn't until I got to that point in the story that I realized that that's what was going on with her. I'm like, she's really not as, sweet and innocent as she seems. I think that she thinks that way, yeah, that she's, altruistic and all of that, but honestly, I think it's more of a selfish thing on her part.
So you're writing more of a fall of a main character where they start off being more on a good side and eventually it's almost like them becoming the bad one. Because you,
Sort
from
of.
what I'm
I think
hearing,
it's, at least in the initial book, I don't really know. I mean, maybe, but she grows quite a bit because she gets to a point where it's kind of like a pendulum. She goes from one to the center. She kind of swings back and forth after the first book, and then finally she swings all the way to the other side. So yes, but as far as the first book, no, because she is able to ultimately cure him. You know, the immortal's like, hey, yeah, I think it actually could be cool to go home and have a farm and, do all the things that I should have done while, before the invasion occurred. She ends up,
and
ultimately
then
curing him. She ends up getting the guy for a minute, and then things happen later.
so which guy? Because it almost sounds like the librarian is the dude that she gets with, not the immortal.
No, no, it's the immortal. She ends up with him.
How does she find the library? Is this like a well-known library? It's like, hey, anybody can
Yes.
research magic and learn all of this stuff.
Yes, it's the main library in town. Yes, that's a big city they live in. So it's the main hub for the city. And the library, it includes quite a bit of magic. Yes, it has a lot of antique books, a lot of vintage books. It's got a lot of knowledge on pretty much anything that you would need to know that is permitted, I guess.
So why is she allowed to just did you say forbidden or just permitted?
That's permitted.
Oh, okay, I was about to be like, well, then why is she just allowed to research? Okay. So what would you say is her big hurdles? Because I mean, she can walk to the library. She meets a dude who's pretty much already going to be like, yeah, sure, I'll help you. What do you think
No.
causes? So no, okay. So the
Her big
tension
hurdle
will
really
be
is getting access to the knowledge. Um, she does make it to the library, but all of that information has been destroyed since the war. So there is not at least public knowledge. There are some people within the higher mage circle that they know blood magic. They are aware of what it can do, and there are some people that are knowledgeable in it. But as far as public knowledge, because it nearly destroyed the earth, they have just either destroyed it or made it very, very difficult to get. And it actually, a lot of the information that she's looking for isn't available in that library. And there isn't anywhere that Dragon could or even would point her to find it. So her path of least resistance really is through him. She finds out kind of through her discussions with him, because again, she's kind of going back and forth with him, dropping hints because he's just a jerk. That he knows what's going on. She kind of figures that out and ends up discovering that he is the one that she needs to be talking to.
now, does she train with him against somebody's wishes, or is that with
His
somebody's
own.
blessing?
His own. So she ends up modifying. So he's put on parole again. He's given a new identity. He is granted a pardon, but he's still on parole. He's not permitted to actually perform any magic. So she approaches the courts to try to modify his parole against without him being present or his consent. And she basically forces his hand and forces him to teach her how to do magic, or blood magic anyway.
Okay.
So I know that
So
this is something
go
that
ahead.
keeps coming through to me, um, and I know um, that you are at least minimally familiar with the three C's: conflict, choice, and consequence. Do you have a
Yep.
sense of for your full story what they are?
There's a lot of
What
them
is
going on. So no.
okay?
No.
All right.
I'm still
I
actually
guess
going
in
through the
some
outline, and this has actually been my biggest problem, is that I have a sense of the story. I really, I've got a bunch of scenes that I've thought of for a really long time. I can kind of string them together, but I don't have anything that's fully fleshed out as far as the three C's.
for a lot of people, the hard one to come up with is the choice. Um, to understand what the character, because if your character isn't making choices, they're just sort of bouncing through the story and they're not doing anything. They're reacting and they're not acting. And so your reader wants to be taken on a journey by a character who's making choices. Um, can you see in your head what the climax is and what the major choice, the gut wrenching choice that she's going to have to make? Who's going to live? Who's going to die? That kind of level of choice. Can you see something like that?
Well, the big choice is obvious. To me, really is the choice uh, to use blood magic in general, and the choice to train. Um, it's kind of one of that moment where there's actually a lot of different choices that she's making at the same moment, if that makes any sense, or at least a lot of different decisions. You
Yeah,
know,
it does.
um, she's she's realizing at that point that she's willing to do anything for this, and that she has kind of screwed this guy over while doing it. but she doesn't care. So, does she do the right thing? Does she do the wrong thing? And is it actually wrong?
Okay. All right. And approximately what point in your book do you think of as that choice being made?
I think that that's when she's actually presenting him with his order to perform community service by training her.
Okay. Are we talking like 3/4 of the way through the book, 80%, 20%?
I think it's actually about 3/4, a little past half, just
Okay.
somewhere between half and 3/4.
Okay. All
Three
right.
fifths.
That's fine. All right. That works. At least to start with, that works. And then what's the consequence here? What you said she loses herself or becomes a shadow priest.
Ultimately,
Why
yes.
is Okay, why is that a negative?
Well, it's a negative because she's lost basically the good person that she was.
Okay.
Or she thought she was. Maybe she never was, but there is some goodness in her. There's some innocence in her as she's approaching this. Um, but it's all kind of thrown to the wayside for, someone that she thinks she loves, um, and something that feels good for the moment, but may not actually be.
Okay, because that sounds like to me an actually an interesting conflict setup for a trilogy. So you have your first book, forcing the conflict, your second book forcing the choice, and your third book, coming down to the consequence. So that sounds like since you've already said this is a multiple book
Yeah.
series, that sounds like one way to go.
Yeah.
Um, okay, and do you have a sense of what the progressive complications are? What are the challenges that she's going to face along the way that will ultimately force her into this choice?
As far as the first book or throughout the
Let's
series?
just do the first book, and usually there are 2 or 3 progressive complications and twists. And you can say no, you don't know yet.
Well, I
Yes.
do. I'm just trying to pinpoint because, like I said, she's going back and forth. You know, she gets to a point where she is absolutely frustrated because she feels like she's getting a couple of inches, and then all of a sudden she's stopped, and there's nowhere else to turn. She's going back and forth to Dragon. Dragon's like, hey, you should look into this. She's like, okay, so tell me a little more. And he's like, nope, sorry, go away. um, and it, she struggles with that. Plus, she's also struggling with trying to get the immortal to decide that he wants to survive, and she doesn't understand why it has to be so freaking difficult. So finally, she kind of melts down, and then the immortal's like, okay, I see you're trying really hard. Yeah, sure, maybe I should. So she's like, okay, so that's the little nibble. And then she continues to try to push forward until she's like, this is all I've got left. She goes to the courts and she forces Dragon's hand, because he keeps telling her no. You know, you can't do it this way. This is what you need to do, but you can't do it that way. She's like, okay, well, and like I said, I was using one of your quotes where don't accept no from somebody who doesn't have the authority to give you a less, or the authority to give you yes. Sorry, I stuttered a little bit there. But basically, she's like, you don't have the authority to give me a yes. The courts do. The courts can give me a yes and force you to do what I want you to do. So,
Do you have more, Catherine?
I do have a few things. So it's
Now that I've
interesting the
totally
images in.
run us off the rails?
No, you haven't. So you're good.
and I'm
um
sorry, I do have severe anxiety, so I like start to ramble and then ADD out.
you know what? All writers will word vomit. The craft what I do is I pull the word vomit, I write you up notes that will explain exactly what you were trying to tell me. Yes.
Cool.
We'll get
So
you a copy of the notes as soon as Miss Catherine has them done.
Thank you.
I do see there's a really big like movement, especially in Disney, to write the villain stories. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel from what you're telling me is that you are writing a villain story. You're writing
Kind
how
of.
she becomes it, where it
Yeah.
almost feels that she herself, I mean, there's good in people, there's even good in villains. They believe that they are doing the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it also sounds like the amount of power that she wasn't
Mm-hmm.
allowed to have being sheltered is too appealing for her to turn away. And now that she
Yeah.
knows where she can get little bits from, she's going to go for it. And I feel that
Yep.
that's how your story is playing out a bit, and you can see it almost in the colors where everything seems
Mm-hmm.
to be um not dull but very monotone almost,
Earthing.
with the amount
Yeah.
of, yeah, like those earthy monotone colors, whereas the mages have those bright colors.
Mm-hmm.
She has that like almost want to move maybe in that direction of not having
Mm-hmm.
that same monotone life that she's been sheltered into, to move on to
Mm-hmm.
that. So you're showing that with your culture and your colors. The type of magic that you have is pretty cool. You've
Mm-hmm.
got all of this broad magic that's like, look at all these really cool things, but the fact that people are maxing out on it automatically shows that somebody's got to start dipping and diving down. And so
Mm-hmm.
she's that person who's going to, and she's pushing everybody else to do exactly what she wants, even though she thinks that that's the idea that you should be doing. She's like, this is right. We're
Right.
healing this person. I'm learning this magic because there will be other people. But just because you think it's right doesn't mean that that's the right thing to be doing. So I feel like you've got
Right.
a cool villainish story going on.
Right. Well,
The
the
thing
thing
that I had
is,
actually written down, several minutes ago was that this really is a fallen angel origin story.
sort of,
And
sort
almost a
of, yeah,
false narrative
yeah.
where we think
And
that she's doing the right thing too.
and I'm sure that she feels the thing is like near the end, she really isn't the one, Dragon, and it's actually funny. I was taking some advice from Mr. V Griffith over here. He's like, well, maybe she's talking to. I had gotten stuck. I had gotten stuck. I was introducing another character way, way, way too early, and I'm like, this doesn't feel right. I'm struggling. So what do I do? He's like, well, maybe you should have her talk to somebody, maybe a pet or a cat. And I'm like, hey, dragons in this world at the same time, maybe they should meet. So I kind of threw them together. He kind of ended up not necessarily taking over the story, but he's definitely involved in about two thirds of it. So he has already been the one. He spent quite a bit of time researching alternative magic, which is how he ended up where he was. Um, so he is that one that finds out how to push it further. He kind of just started to dive even deeper. So she's trying to actually get up to that level, and then she falls
Mhm. Yeah,
because he
and you
basically ends
can
up leaving
I
her in
can
the
see
dust.
that going. Yeah. And it's a cool idea to do more of a fall of a character than to do like,
Hmm.
haha, you are the absolute hero. I like when you
Yeah.
get to see the darker side of characters.
I love him, and I don't know why I've always kind of been that way, but I don't always feel and I've always been sort of I don't feel like everything is black and white. There's definitely, gray. And as far as, the villain, they think that they're doing good too. It's just a different viewpoint. So,
Yeah, they're the hero of their own story.
yeah. So that was my thought anyway.
Well, I'll definitely write up the notes along with other questions. So, usually, when I write up notes for people, I'll add in questions that I had where I'm just prying just a little bit more. It doesn't mean you have to answer me, it's just to get you thinking. And then I
Right.
do have several different templates that I use with people, and I'll send you a bunch of those too. So, you can flesh out more of the stuff, and then it's all right there. So, they'll ask you questions, and you can flesh out things more as the answers come to you. They don't have to be all filled out. That's what I tell people. It's like, you don't have to know. I'm a pantser. I love to pants. Outlining is the devil to me.
I'm an
So to
absolute
me,
pantser.
outlining is the devil. I just like to world build and I know my character. And then from there, that's all I need to write my story. So I'll send you some
Yeah,
stuff and hopefully that'll help solidify some things for you too.
cool. Yeah, my thing is I know my characters really well. I know what they would do in any particular instance, but the big things surrounding them, like their world, I've always had such a hard time with that. So any help that you can give me would be wonderful.
Oh yeah, I've got like 10 templates I can send you.
Cool.
Yeah, I've got magic stuff. I have spells. I have, what does your city look like? I even have clothing. So I got you.
Cool. Cool.
Alrighty, then we'll go ahead and end it here and catch up with you possibly next time. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Stay magical.